I first wrote this script back before the Switch re-releases of Super Mario 3D All-Stars and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light came out. I wonder if they ever actually did. It doesn't look like it. Must have been delayed. What we do know, though, is that The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD isn't delayed, and that it is a $60 re-release of a game that was originally $50. I'm not gonna talk about this fact yet, mostly because everything I'd have to say on it has already been said, and all the comments I would get on my argument would be the same goofball Nintendo bootlicking that I've seen enough of. Instead of bellyaching and bristling my neckbeard for 30 minutes like everyone else has about Nintendo's recent re-releases, we are going to explore what makes re-releases important, what makes them good, what the standards are that have been set by the industry, and the importance of preservation in this conversation. And, as my promise to you, the viewer, I'll keep this thumbnail from being clickbait by saying firmly up front that Nintendo's re-releases are frequently subpar, and that we'll return to 3 contentious re-releases, Skyward Sword, Super Mario 3D All-Stars, and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light several times throughout this video to analyze what they do compared to re-releases from other publishers. During the internet age, it's easy to forget that many games from our retro past have never seen official releases or translations. Fans of any niche game or long-running series will have likely had to jump through the hoops of downloading, patching, and playing games through morally good and legally criminal means. Sweet Home, Mother 3, Shin Megami Tensei. These are all games that I've only ever played through emulation because the only other option is cost-prohibitive importation and Rosetta Stone. Although I guess as a creepy weeb who only plays Japanese games, I should already be on that Rosetta Stone grind. The point of all this is to say that video games from all places and time are easier to access than ever for the tech-minded, and that can make it easy to forget that many of these old games are simply not accessible to most people. The ability to emulate and patch games is a simple but niche skill, and the existence of emulators is unknown to the vast majority of casual gamers. For artists, games, and unfortunately capitalists, it remains important that games have available official releases on mainstream storefronts. For many gamers, official releases are the best and only way to play games. That's why re-releases are important, but not the only reason. As video games mature and old games become older, the way games are preserved is becoming a more pressing issue. This video will be focused on how games are not only preserved, but how they're made available. What are different distribution and remastering philosophies that publishers have taken, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of each method? Now that we're fully into the internet distribution age, the days of needing to release a physical copy of Sonic Mega Collection and Mega Man Anniversary Collection are behind us. By virtue of perpetual releases on virtual storefronts, old games are going to be more consistently available than they ever have been before, so let's take a look at how the legacy of a medium is being preserved. When it comes to re-releasing older games, there's a lot of debate and many different philosophies about how games should be preserved and whether or not games should be re-released in states as similar to the original version as possible or modernized as much as possible. Some examples of the former style are the Virtual Console and the NES and SNES Online on the Switch. If you look at the Wii Virtual Console version of Faxanadu, the game is emulated as if it were played on original hardware, including the game's original aspect ratio, issues such as sprite flicker caused by the NES's limitations, and outside of the Virtual Console's bare-bones suspend feature, the game uses its original password and checkpoint systems. Outside of optimizing the game to output to modern TVs and allowing the use of Wii remotes and classic controllers, the Virtual Console version of Faxanadu is the same experience as playing on the original cartridge, or at least as similar an experience as can be achieved on emulation with modern hardware. By the way, if you've never played Faxanadu, you really should. It's one of the best NES games ever made, and is a sort of NES precursor to games like Dark Souls. It's a better version of Castlevania II Simon's Quest and a badass dark fantasy action RPG. This method of preservation is generally the easiest, with the brunt of the work being in making sure the emulation is solid and that player input is as equally responsive as it was on original hardware. Sometimes though, this can be a struggle. Twitch games such as Punch-Out that require lightning-quick reflexes are harder on their Virtual Console and NES Online versions because they haven't been optimized for modern flat-screen TVs. This creates a lag that isn't there on original hardware outputting on a tube TV. The Devil May Cry HD collection is essentially straight ports of the original PS2 Devil May Cry trilogy, except optimized to be output in 720p through HDMI and component cables, but by doing very little, some new issues were created, such as texture pop-in and unintended audio loops. This is nothing game-breaking, but it does show that with video games, where technology changes so much, even between two console generations, extensive tinkering may be required to preserve a game in its original form. Of course, sometimes the results can be a little catastrophic. The Silent Hill HD collection is a notorious example of where a pretty hands-off approach caused big problems. Kinda? There was a lot of tinkering done to Silent Hills 2 and 3 in this collection, but mostly the changes were in the voice acting, with Silent Hill 2 coming with the original voice track and a remade voice track that the player can choose between, and Silent Hill 3 inexplicably having only the remade voice track available. For some reason. This is bad, and it's a baffling decision, but it isn't why the Silent Hill HD collection is considered a disaster. Because of issues preserving the original code for both games, the versions included in the HD collection are beta versions. It's for similar reasons that the original Silent Hill is not included. These are re-releases of finished games that are using unfinished versions as the base. The problems are numerous, but the most notable is that the thick fog that blankets Silent Hill 2 is mostly gone. Originally, the visibility around James Sunderland, the sexual-sidal protagonist, was horrendous. This had two purposes, with the most important being that it greatly upped the terror, especially while exploring the streets of Silent Hill. Unable to see, the player only knows of approaching monsters from the fuzzy static on James' radio, forcing the player to rely on sound where their eyes fail. Very Enemy Zero, and very effective. The fog also served the important technical purpose of freeing the development team from having to create long draw distances, which greatly improves the game's performance. Unfortunately, the HD version lacks most of the fog, and boy does it make this game look like shit! Issues ranging from controller responsiveness to graphical glitches and entirely missing assets mean that a true preservation and re-release of a video game requires some degree of tinkering in order to preserve the original artistic intent of a game. This makes video games unique in terms of preservation, or at least as far as making old games available on new hardware in their original forms, as no other medium requires such a degree of changes in order to be restored to its original state. Film is a medium worth comparing game preservation to, because it's a medium that requires a lot of work to preserve, but unlike games, has generally agreed upon rules for preservation and restoration. Also, I just kinda wanna put my unused bachelor's degree to good use. It was a lot of money. After the Wild West of the VHS era, a set of rules for film preservation and distribution have been codified, including the preservation of the original aspect ratio, frame rate, grain structure, audio track, and never, ever, please God, never colorizing black and white films. The goal of film preservation and restoration is to recreate the original experience and vision of the work as accurately as possible, and we've become good at knowing what that process looks like. For video games though, it's still unknown what a preservation that accurately recreates the original experience looks like. Obviously, it's not the HD versions of Silent Hills 2 and 3, or even the HD versions of the Devil May Cry trilogy. But what about a game like Punch-Out on the NES Online? The game is emulated basically as is, and it's an almost one-to-one experience with the NES original, except for a slight input lag that is now present on modern TVs that was not there on older TVs. This input lag makes the challenge of the later bosses greater than what was originally intended, as they were not built to be fought with this little bit of input lag. Of course, the game is not unbeatable on NES Online. I've done it. The fight formerly known as Mike Tyson is pretty tough and made tougher by trying to emulate the unaltered original on an HDTV, so, it's not really my gamer cred that, So it begs the question, should all of the enemies in Punch-Out be slowed down in proportion to the lag that wasn't present on the NES? Purists may scoff at this notion, but it would make the game's difficulty closer to its originally intended level for a modern audience. And it's worth remembering, though, that by changing nothing, you end up with situations like the 3D All-Stars version of Super Mario Sunshine, where the game is unchanged, but ends up a different experience from the original because there was no correction for the Switch controller not having analog triggers. And sometimes the solutions to these issues are very simple, like adding GameCube controller support, which Nintendo did add post-release. You could also reasonably see remapped controls or new inputs added that adjust the design of an older game to be compatible with modern hardware. None of what we've looked at in this first section are radical changes, but rather avoiding making changes at all, being as unintrusive as possible. There are, as we've seen, pitfalls to this approach, as a hands-off philosophy can result in poor performance, as porting isn't as simple as opening an NES game, hitting Ctrl-S, and saving as a Switch file. There are great benefits to this approach. It can keep the original vision of the designers mostly intact and allow players to fully immerse themselves in the original game, warts and all. Archaic save systems to limited lives and everything in between are all a part of older games, and there is value in experiencing older games as they were originally released. It's a fossil record to learn from and, well, to enjoy. Misguided design from a long time ago still has some value to give us. There definitely is, however, a question here, because many decisions made with older games were as much a product of technical limitations as it was intentional design choices. Which is where we get into re-releases that retain the original game with added quality of life features. The actual definition of quality of life features is fuzzy, and some quality of life features change the nature of the game, while others do not. The kinds of changes that don't change the original game are generally accessibility features, and it's accessibility features that I think that re-releases should always bring to the table. Features like remappable controls, colorblind filters, customizable subtitles and text, and a large variety of controller compatibility are critical to make older games more accessible to people with disabilities, while also retaining the original vision of the game. Accessibility features are no more invasive to a game experience than adding subtitles to a foreign language film or having subtitles available for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Sometimes these accessibility additions have a positive effect for everyone and not just players with disabilities. The ability to adjust audio levels or customize subtitles can help players who are in noisy environments, use headphones, or have TVs with busted speakers. When the button on the iPhone I had for years broke, I was able to squeeze another year of usage out of it by using the digital home button that can be activated to help people with motor disabilities who physically cannot press a button. The Castlevania Anniversary Collection, for example, allows players to extensively remap the controls, which helps players both with and without disabilities to enjoy the games. Beyond accessibility features, changes that are considered quality of life enhancements can actually alter the original experience, and there is a question as to whether or not these kinds of changes are good for video game preservation. In this camp, we find something like Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. This re-release no longer exists, having been a victim to Nintendo's artificial scarcity model. As far as new quality of life features go, it included everything from the ability to fast forward the game, create save states, and rewind time. These features basically bring Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light in line with recent Fire Emblem games where features like skipping enemy turns and rewinding time have become staples. These improvements make the game more accessible to a modern audience, and for many players, these features make a game that can get very slow and clunky much more appealing. But if utilized by the player, these features do fundamentally alter the experience of the game. Playing Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light without speed up is a slow experience. So slow. Even with animations turned off. UI is clunky. Map movement is slow. Enemies think for too damn long. You even have to watch enemies move their cursor around, which actually, you know what, I think that's really funny, so that's not a bad thing. By adding rewind, fast forward, and save states, the game now rewards players for what is essentially safe scumming their way around mistakes and bad luck. I think that's kind of a shame, because part of the uniqueness of Fire Emblem is lost this way. One of the most interesting design decisions of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is how it is built around these mistakes and these bits of bad luck happening. And by allowing players to easily speed through and reload sections of the game, it makes it less likely that players will experience the game as intended and all of its weirder mechanics. Of course, on the flip side, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light really is slow and clunky, and adding a speed up feature is just a way to respect the player's time. I'm a big fan of respecting the player's time. That's why I ultimately don't mind these newly added features, especially because most of the game's clunkiness is a product of its time rather than deliberate design decisions. This is really the question that all re-releases and ports need to ask. Are the new features enhancing the intended experience or altering it? Shozu Kaga, the designer of Fire Emblem, wanted players to play on after mistakes and deaths so that they formed their own unique narratives that were different from every other player. Of course, many players want to keep all their 8-bit characters alive and do not like to play past mistakes, as was intended. This, of course, begs another question. Should a re-release make changes to the original game to accommodate the different ways that people want to play the game? Reflexively, I say no, at least if the goal is preservation, but this is a no that I can't commit to, because particularly when it comes to retro games, there is one aspect that almost always gets changed on re-release: the save systems, and it is almost always for the better. Old school games were pretty limited on how saving worked for a variety of Old school games were pretty limited on how saving worked for a variety of technological and cost issues, as well as carrying on a lot of bad habits from the arcade days. Sometimes modernizing save systems doesn't change the game at all. If you give Faxanadu 3 save slots, then it would be the same game, except loading would be more convenient than entering a password every time you turn the game on. Of course, games often do a lot more than adding save slots to alter their save systems. Games on the NES and SNES Online have 3 quick save slots. The Castlevania Anniversary Collection adds a quick save for each game, and Super Mario World Super Mario Advance 2 allows for manual saving anywhere on the overworld. Does this fundamentally change how these games work? Yes, but it also makes many of them better. The OG Castlevania has to be beaten in one sitting, and the original version of Super Mario World could cause you to lose significant amounts of progress if you got a game over. Having to beat a game as difficult and aggressive as Castlevania in one sitting is just a pain in the ass and a product of technical limitations, while the save system in Super Mario World is just kind of irritating. You can only save after beating special levels, castles, ghost houses, etc., and it means there are points in the game where you will inevitably have to go back through levels you've already beaten, which is not so fun. As a player, you've already proven yourself capable of beating these challenges. The natural argument against this is that saving is a sort of strategic exercise. You have to balance your lives, exploration of the world, and your own time to decide when you need to go beat a special level, but this is about as strategic as the pitcher hitting in baseball. It's just an excuse for bad game design. The save system as originally designed in Super Mario World can be circumvented by going back and beating an easier ghost house to save, or as everyone did when I played the game as a kid, go back to Yoshi's Island 2 and grind up 99 lives. It's very easy to rack up lives here, which is a testament both to how the game's original save system is silly and encourages grinding, and to how limited lives in games is generally bad, but that's another topic for another time. The newly revamped save system in the GBA version of Super Mario World makes the game better, but it isn't the original experience of the game. As such, the addition of rewinding in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light will make the game better for many players, especially those who try to keep everyone alive in Fire Emblem. So, what's the best way to both preserve the original intended experience of a game and make it more appealing to modern audiences? Here's a very simple suggestion. Give players options up front to set which features they want to use while they play, with different options marked as being original, new, or the intended experience. In the PS4 version of Resident Evil Remake on the Resident Evil Origins collection, The game allows the player to toggle between widescreen and original full screen aspect ratio, as well as between the original tank controls and a more standard control scheme. Whenever I play the Resident Evil Remake, I always play in the original aspect ratio with the tank controls. Each shot in the game was composed for 4:3 or 1.33 to 1 for us pretentious film assholes, and everything from item placement to enemy locations and attack patterns was built around the tank controls. So that's the way I like to play. It's that authentic Resident Evil Remake feel that I enjoy. But if a player struggles with tank controls to the point where they can't enjoy the game, and changing to a more conventional control scheme allows them to really get into the game and have a good time, then it's a good option to have, and why not have it in there as an option? It both preserves the original game and expands the range of enjoyment that players can have. I myself have definitely benefited from this. Darkest Dungeon, for example, is a game that gives the player a ton of features that they can toggle on and off, with some features marked as the intended experience. Enemy corpses are an example of a feature that's intended, but I can't stand. I think it makes the game a much bigger slog, and turning it off allowed me to really enjoy my time with Darkest Dungeon. In Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, you can simply refrain from using rewind as you need to go out of the way to use it, but an even better option would be to also include an option in the game to create an Iron Man save file where rewind is disabled and every action is saved, Dark Souls style. This is a feature in XCOM, a game series that is at its most exciting when Iron Man. If Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light added this feature, it would both preserve Kaga's original vision and make the game more accessible. This is the part where I say, as I always do, that future re-releases of games should, when applicable, try to drop new fun modes like randomizers and other such goodies to make a package both a preservation of the classic and to breathe it some new life for old fans. When Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light's brief re-release was announced, the question was frequently asked, if its remake, Shadow Dragon, is available on the DS and Wii U and is already in English, why not just port it to the Switch instead? As anyone who's played both will tell you, these two versions of Marth's original adventure are vastly different from one another, but instead of listing all the differences between each of these versions, it's worth considering where this question comes from. Why Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but not the technically superior and more modern Shadow Dragon? This question originates, I think, in the idea that Shadow Dragon is simply a graphical enhancement of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, with a few bells and whistles added for quality of life. It makes sense that people would have this impression because, after all, there is a third type of re-release that we haven't talked about yet: the graphical overhaul. You have pure preservation, Punch-Out on Switch, preservation with additional quality of life, Super Mario Bros. Advance 2 Super Mario World, and then you have the big, massive graphical overhauls, the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, and the 2020 version of Demon's Souls. Unlike HD collections like Devil May Cry and Silent Hill, their graphics have been remade from the ground up. However, mechanically and structurally, these games are basically the exact same as their original counterparts. Sometimes bad game design decisions are corrected, such as the Insane Trilogy fixing the original Crash Bandicoot's bafflingly awful save system, and other times game-breaking exploits are fixed, such as Demon's Souls' item duping glitch. Both of these decisions are questionable for reasons we've already talked about, so we'll table discussion on save features and bugs for now. These games are not remakes, just hella nice coats of paint, and the impression that many people have is that Shadow Dragon is simply a new coat of paint for the OG. But that's not really true, as Shadow Dragon is a straight-up remake and not a re-release. The difference between a re-release and remake is important, and games like the Insane Trilogy do blur the line. The Insane Trilogy and 2020 Demon's Souls stand out compared to Switch Punch-Out because they're not preservation efforts. A preservation would keep those chunky PS1 graphics for Crash Bandicoot, but they're not remakes either. A remake adds significant content, new gameplay mechanics, or completely overhauls the original experience. Think of the Crimson Heads in Resident Evil Remake, which fundamentally changed the way you approach zombie encounters, or the shifted camera angle in the 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2. These new mechanics make the game's entirely unique experience from the originals, not just as visceral experiences, but also as mechanical experiences. Like added quality of life features, these graphical overhauls are re-releases designed to make the games more accessible to modern audiences, and from a marketing perspective, they can be awesome tech demos. Demon's Souls on the PS5 sure makes me excited to get my hands on that game because damn fuck is it pretty. Just too bad I don't have the stamina to stay up till 4 in the morning to buy a PS5. Overall, the purpose of these games is to both preserve the gameplay of the original while indulging in neat modern tech. Because of the resources required and general lack of artistic freedom in these types of projects, these are pretty rare compared to standard preservations and ports, but they've been a staple of video games as long as there's been new tech, with examples as early and prominent as Super Mario All-Stars. Super Mario All-Stars almost makes you think of a certain 35th anniversary collection that was maybe phoning it in a little bit, but more on that in a moment. Shadow Dragon belongs much more in the remake category than it does to the graphical overhaul category. Reclassing and new methods of trading and item management to make the game a mechanically distinct experience from the original. And that is the separating factor between a remake and a graphical overhaul. A graphical overhaul is just a spiced up graphical enhancement that mechanically and structurally plays the same. To recap, we've looked at the various ways that games can be both preserved and modernized in re-releases. So the question I'm left with is, what should we expect and demand from video game re-releases, specifically of older games? Well, I called this section the big package, and maybe that shows my hand early. No, the big package doesn't refer to Dick, or even to Girahim, or the Scalper's edition of Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but something far more comprehensive. Devil May Cry HD Collection? 3 games. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy? 3 games. Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World? 5 games. When you're talking about retro games, the numbers can get even better. The Mega Man Legacy Collection has 6 games. The Sega Genesis Collection has 28 games, and the PS3 re-release of that collection has a staggering 48 games. The point is to say that games as recent as the PS2 era are re-released as trilogies. Hell, games as recent as the PS3 have been re-released as trilogies, with Uncharted, the Nathan Drake Collection, compiling all 3 PS3 Uncharted games on the PS4. By the way, that collection is $20 in the US, a third of the price of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, a collection that houses 2 games older than the Uncharted series. And hey, the Nathan Drake Collection released in 2015 and is still available for download 6 years after its release. Sure wish I could, say the same for, Mario. I think by now you can all see where this is going. In my view, the best way to re-release older games is to bundle them together in box sets and collections that are illustrative of a series, era, or console. Retro games are tiny, often short, and many have never been properly released worldwide. So, what goes into a good box set of retro games? When preserving games and re-releasing older games, some of the most important considerations are cost and efficiency, at least from a consumer perspective. What is the re-release bringing that makes the purchase better than simply emulating the games? While that concern might only apply to more hardcore tech-oriented gamers who are familiar with emulation, there still is the question that needs to be answered for customers of why do I want to go back and pay for games that are 20 or 30 years old? For many publishers, they've landed on the correct answers of low cost and consolidation. By bringing 6 Mega Man games together at $15, Capcom is making the games both convenient to own and jump between, but also affordable. In a vacuum, however, that isn't better than emulation. Even the Legacy Collection features of rewind and higher processing power don't distinguish it from an emulator. What does distinguish it, however, is the digital art book, an easy-to-use remix mode, and an online leaderboard. Those are pretty sick features that not only help preserve the OG Mega Man games, but keep them fresh. Online features are great ways to rejuvenate old games, with even Nintendo putting in the legwork with some NES online games having easy-to-use online multiplayer like Dr. Mario. Of course, such features aren't necessary, and other amenities can be put into games to make them into great and unique packages. The impetus behind this section actually came from a very, very good collection that I've been playing recently, and have mentioned a couple of times already. Yes, somehow even Konami nails it when they're not busy making pachinko machines. The Castlevania Anniversary Collection is so good it hurts. It's not perfect, but let's talk about what it has. The collection contains Castlevania, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, Super Castlevania 4, Castlevania the Adventurer, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, Castlevania Bloodlines, and, for its first release outside of Japan, the Famicom version of Kid Dracula. On top of that, all of the games except for Simon's Quest come with their Japanese versions. The games all come with multiple aspect ratios and video options. Belmont's Revenge, for example, allows you to play with that crisp, beautiful original image. That's so pretty on a 4K TV. How does a Game Boy game even look this good? But you can even play it with that barf green Game Boy filter and the color version of the game. That color version is super yummy too. I love it. It even has a widescreen version if you like your games looking like piss. I don't like the way widescreen looks in this collection. Everyone just looks chunky, which I'm fine with thick Simon, but it's not all that. But it's an option, and more optional options and customization for the player is good. God, I love Onchi Castlevania so much. It's too bad it puts me in a fucking shit mood. But now you have quick saves. Yeah, I fully acknowledge that it's cheating, but when you're playing Castlevania the Adventure, do you really care? I sure don't. Maybe you do. And if playing these games with their brutal save and life systems is what you want, I wish the games had an option to do a playthrough with quick saves disabled. But Castlevania the Adventure, man. I save scum that whole fucking game. This may be the worst piece of shit I've ever beaten. Look at this stretch of jumps in Chapter 1. What is the point? It's difficult, but it's not challenging. How much do you like being a metronome? Maybe all old school Castlevania is just a rhythm game rather than a reactive action game, and this sequence is laying it all bare. It fucking sucks. A good game, though, is Castlevania Legends, which is absent from the collection. The issues with this anniversary collection are limited to a couple of places. For one, some of the classic-style Castlevania games are left out. The Game Boy version of Kid Dracula, Rondo of Blood, Dracula X, and Legends are all missing. Rondo of Blood has some rights issues, but none of the others do, so their exclusion is disappointing. Only having one quick save slot for each game sucks, especially for me because it made it impossible to get footage of some of the games without replaying large sections, like Level 3 of the Adventure. No? I'm not playing Level 2 again just to do Level 3. The Level 3 footage you see here is from Mega Rayquaza 911's speedrun. Regardless of my nitpicks of this set, the whole shebang is capped off with an art book that includes concept art, cover art, interviews with developers and composers, and all kinds of goodies. Again, it could be better by including legends, digital scans of the original instruction manuals, and a unique border for each game instead of the same one for every game, but hot diggity damn is this a good package for $20. And I suppose this wraps around to the problem with many Nintendo re-releases. It's that they're underwhelming and overpriced compared to the standards set by other publishers. Limited digital re-releases like Super Mario 3D All-Stars, and re-releases that are more expensive than the original versions like Skyward Sword. The fact that their re-releases are treated like the print run of an expensive collector's edition and priced like resource-intensive overhauls like 2020 Demon's Souls is what makes Nintendo re-releases, to put it kindly, just a little underwhelming. I could cynically bitch about this for a while, but I actually want to end this video off by looking outside of official publishers and towards the fans. Fans driven by a love for games, and not by profit, have dedicated untold hours translating, modding, updating, patching, hacking, and remixing games from all genres, series, times, and places. Japanese exclusive Nintendo games like the first 6 Fire Emblem games and Mother 3 are only available in English because of the hard work of fans to translate these games for worldwide audiences. And all this work was for free and out of love. Which, out of everything we talked about, really is the best way to approach all preservation. I hope you all had a good time watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Videos like this one are made possible by my generous patrons over at patreon.com. Follow the link in the description below if you would like to support the channel. Special shout out to my current patrons, BMO McGrim, Kate Rose, Dector A, Estjuice, Exod, Jacobra, Pengus Khan, Starry, Swordlocked, That Icarus Kid, Too Clutch, Vivian, Yokai, Zoop Lord, Anime Go Go Go, Boots 42, Henny G, Kinsey, L. Brown, Liar Fan, Nin, Obsessive Fool, Uther 007, Will Brock, Zetetic, A.L. Mandite, Bessapedal, Cristobal Herrero Iglesias, E-Dub, Forrest McFarland, Gilgamessed Up, Hayden Quigley Herrick, Logjam, Melissa G, Michael Krause, Nathaniel Peters, Puzzles B, Jingshin, Quaros, Ruin, Sylvester, Stephanie Roman, Tarek, Tectonic Improv, William Clemens, Willem, Anita Jacinda, Anton Nielsen, Artor, Dabney, Danny Doyle, Danielle Kalaskis, Eltson, Faye Nedius, Gawain, G-Merk, James Welsh, Jameson, Jesse Burge, Lil Beats, Lou Rios, Lucas DM, Max, Mike Picky 22, Moderation Dev, Naomi Isabel, Noah Avis, Noah Fedderson, Noe, Numberwang, Reflectka, Rosenbud, Saren Lowell, Shup, Thomas G. Grow, T. Kloss 45, Tough Emily, Whooperfloss, and Zachary Parrish. Thank you all so much for your continued support.